You ever get pushed so far, you stop playing nice and start playing smart? That's where I was the day the HOA decided to pick a fight with the wrong guy. It started innocently enough. Just me, my dog Buster, and a dream of fixing up an old RV for some well-earned freedom after years of punching the corporate clock. I'd worked 35 years in logistics, buried under spreadsheets and warehouse inventories. Retirement was my shot at living life on my own terms. No bosses, no time cards, just highways, national parks, and roadside diners with questionable coffee. The RV was a 1998 Winnebago Brave. I picked up off a guy 2 towns over. Needed some love, sure, some rust, a little roof damage, and an interior that screamed, smoked in every day since Clinton's first term. But I saw potential. I pictured mountain views through the windshield, my boots on the dash, and Buster's ears flapping out the side window as we sped past the miles I'd never had time to chase before. I parked the RV in my own driveway, which, I should point out, is more than generous in size. I'm not talking some cramped suburban car pad. My house sits on a corner lot with enough concrete to host a neighborhood cookout. It wasn't blocking anyone's view, not infringing on anyone's curb appeal, just sitting there like any other vehicle, quietly minding its business. Then came the letter, plain white envelope. No return address, but I knew that passive-aggressive font anywhere. The HOA. I opened it with the same enthusiasm as a jury summons. Dear homeowner, it began, because God forbid they use my name. This is a courtesy reminder that recreational vehicles may not be stored in view for more than 48 hours. Stored. Like it was a broken-down boat on cinder blocks. I wasn't storing it. I was restoring it. Every morning I was out there with a paint scraper or wrench in hand, sweat on my brow, Buster at my feet. I wasn't ignoring the thing. I was bonding with it. I figured maybe they didn't understand, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I called them. I got Cheryl on the line, the HOA secretary who sounded like she had a permanent smile and a deep distrust of anything with wheels bigger than a minivan. I'm actually renovating the RV, I explained, not storing it. I'm actively working on it almost every day. Well, sir, she said with syrupy patience, the rule is about visual impact. If it's visible from the street, even under renovation, it's considered a violation. Visual impact? I echoed. It's a driveway. Am I allowed to park my truck there? Of course. So if I put a camper shell on the truck, is that a problem? That would depend on the duration and size. Cheryl, I cut in. It's parked on my property. That conversation went in circles. I got nowhere. But I'm a team player when it makes sense, so I figured I'd try to compromise. I moved the RV to the side of the house, built a temporary wooden fence around it, even planted some tall, potted shrubs to make the thing as invisible as possible. Didn't matter. Another letter came, this time with bold red lettering and the word violation underlined 3 times. According to them, the RV was still in view from the sidewalk, if you craned your neck from a very specific angle across the street. It was like I was in some dystopian HOA Hunger Games, where the last man standing was the one who had the blandest house and the most invisible possessions. I went to the next HOA meeting, which felt less like a community discussion and more like a courtroom drama where I was the defendant. I brought photos showing how little of the RV could actually be seen. I even brought a diagram of my property lines, hoping reason would prevail. But then Greg stood up. Greg is the kind of guy who looks like he was born in khakis and never learned to blink. President of the HOA, big corner house, drives a BMW that he waxes at 7 a.m. every Saturday whether it's dirty or not. He stood there with his arms crossed and said, "We have to think about the property values. If we allow one person to bend the rules, where does it stop?" I bit my tongue so hard it nearly bled. Property values? My RV was cleaner than some of the cars parked on our street. But there was no point arguing. The board voted, 5-1 against me. Cheryl gave me a copy of the minutes with a sticky note on top that read, "Please relocate the RV within 5 business days to avoid further action." I tried one last time, sent an appeal in writing, offered to pay for additional fencing, even volunteered to move it every other day if that would help. No response. 2 days later, I came home to find a bright orange sticker on the windshield. Final notice before towing. They gave me until Friday. I stared at that sticker for a long time. Buster sat at my feet, whining like he could feel my blood pressure spike. I was tired of playing defense, tired of being polite and reasonable and flexible. If they were going to treat me like a problem, I'd show them how creative a problem could be. That night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon, sat on my porch, and watched Greg walk his Pomeranian like he did every night. He didn't glance at me, but I could tell he was satisfied. The RV would be gone soon, and his view of the world would be restored to the sterile, regulation-approved perfection he lived for. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had one final card to play. One very legal, very public card that would park my frustration exactly where it belonged. I went inside, booted up my computer, and pulled up the county zoning maps. If they wanted the RV out of sight, I'd give them that, but I'd make sure. They'd never forget it. Greg was the kind of man who didn't just follow rules, he weaponized them. The kind of neighbor who'd remind you your trash bins were out 10 minutes too early, or that your grass had grown just a shade past regulation length. He was always watching, like a nosy security camera with a superiority complex. His house sat like a smug king on a hill. Corner lot, 3-car driveway, a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it had never known the touch of bare feet. Every bush trimmed with mathematical precision, every window free of smudges. He even had those motion sensor lights that clicked on like a spotlight anytime someone got within 30 feet of his precious hedge line. And that was the house I had in my sights. The morning after I got the final warning notice, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee and the city's zoning website open in one browser tab, the property appraiser's office in another, and the HOA's bylaws printed in a pile next to me like courtroom evidence. If they were going to play this game by the book, then so was I, except I was about to read the whole book, not just the parts Greg liked to quote. I started by looking at my own property lines again, just to make sure I hadn't missed something. Nope. My RV was well within my bounds, but the in-view clause was vague enough for the HOA to exploit. That's when I remembered something I'd overheard during one of those never-ending HOA meetings. Something about the green strips along certain parts of the neighborhood being technically owned by the county, not the HOA or the residents. Greg's house had one of those green strips, a long, wide curb space between the sidewalk and the street, like a perfectly rolled-out welcome mat for an RV. I zoomed in on the satellite images, then double-checked the zoning overlay. It was true. That entire section of grass in front of Greg's property was not his. It looked like his, and he certainly treated it like his, but legally, it was public right-of-way. Meaning, I could park a registered, functioning vehicle there for up to 72 hours without violating a single city code. I nearly laughed out loud. I called the city just to be sure. Spoke to a woman in the Department of Transportation who confirmed it in writing. As long as I wasn't blocking a driveway, a fire hydrant, or impeding traffic, I could park on any public curb. I thanked her, printed the email, and carefully folded it into my pocket like a permission slip from God himself. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and just the right amount of spite in the air. I walked Buster like normal, waved to a few neighbors, then walked back to my driveway, climbed into the RV, started her up, and headed slowly, deliberately, 3 blocks over to Greg's house. Now it wasn't just about being legal. It had to be perfectly legal. I took my time aligning the RV along the curb, just a few inches off the grass but not touching it. Left enough room in front and behind so I wasn't blocking anyone. I parked right in front of Greg's enormous bay window, like a cinematic frame from a revenge movie. And then I waited. It didn't take long. The moment Greg opened his front door to grab his mail and saw my RV gleaming in the morning sun, I saw his entire posture change. His jaw tightened. His eyes squinted like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He marched over in that fast-walking, arms-pumping way that men use when they're trying to act calm but are ready to explode. He didn't knock on the door. He pounded. I opened it slowly, holding my coffee, and smiled. "Morning, Greg. Beautiful day, isn't it? You can't park this thing here," he said through gritted teeth. "This is my property." "Actually, it's not," I replied, casually handing him a printed copy of the city's zoning map and the email from the DOT. "According to the county, this strip is public right-of-way. Perfectly legal to park here." He stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. "But this is in front of my house." Yes, it is." He stormed off without another word. 5 minutes later, Cheryl from the HOA was calling me. "Mr. Henderson," she began, "we've received a complaint about—" "It's legal," I interrupted. "I already checked. I can park here for up to 72 hours, not blocking a thing. Not on private property. Not against city code. Want me to forward you the confirmation?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That won't be necessary." Click. I sat down in my lawn chair beside the RV, unfolded a small side table, set my coffee down, and let Buster lounge in the shade with a fresh chew toy. I even set out a little welcome sign next to the RV door that said, "Home is where you park it," just for extra flair. Throughout the day, neighbors walked by, slowing their steps just enough to take in the scene. A few of them smirked, others looked confused, but I noticed something surprising. Most of them nodded. One even stopped to say, "About time someone gave that guy a taste of his own medicine." Greg, meanwhile, spent most of the day pacing inside his house, occasionally pulling back the curtain to glare like a sitcom villain. I could almost hear the vein in his temple throbbing. That evening, his wife came out, phone in hand, and took about a dozen photos from different angles. I waved. The next day, I set out a folding grill and made breakfast sausages. The smell wafted into Greg's yard. I whistled a little tune while flipping them. A kid from down the block stopped by with his dad to check out the RV. "Is this a spaceship?" he asked. "Close enough," I said. By day 3, Greg was visibly unraveling. He came outside at least twice to measure the RV's distance from the curb. Once, I saw him flipping through a binder full of HOA policies on a lawn chair of his own, but none of it mattered. I wasn't breaking any rules, his, mine, or the city's. I wasn't just parking. I was protesting, with precision. And just like that, the power started to shift. For once, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Greg, the man who prided himself on knowing and enforcing every rule in the book, was getting schooled by the book. The best part? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't raising my voice, damaging property, or making a mess. I was just existing, legally, strategically, and with the biggest, shiniest reminder of neighborhood hypocrisy parked right outside his picture-perfect home. For the next 3 days, my RV became the most talked-about attraction in the neighborhood. You'd think I'd parked a UFO in front of Greg's house with how many people stopped to look, whisper, and occasionally laugh out loud as they strolled past. Some walked their dogs a little slower. Others made excuses to jog in circles just to get another glimpse. It wasn't just the RV itself. It was what it represented. A quiet, defiant middle finger to Greg and the oppressive reign of the HOA board, and I made sure to keep it civil. That was the beauty of it. I didn't break a single rule. I didn't so much as step on Greg's lawn. Every detail was by the book. The RV was clean, polished, parked perfectly within the public access strip. I didn't play loud music, didn't leave trash, didn't block sidewalks. I was the picture of lawful presence. Still, Greg couldn't stand it. The morning of the second day, I caught sight of him storming out of his front door wearing a robe and slippers like a man betrayed by the gods. He marched straight to the curb. with a tape measure and started pacing around my RV like a building inspector having a nervous breakdown. I opened the RV door and leaned out with a smile. "Need a hand there, Greg?" He didn't answer. Just measured the distance from the curb to the RV tires, then the width of the public strip, then snapped a few photos with his phone before muttering to himself and disappearing back inside. Not long after, a police cruiser rolled up slowly and parked across the street. A young officer got out, walked over with a clipboard, and knocked politely on the RV's side. "Morning," he said. "We've had a complaint about a possible code violation." I nodded, handed him the folder I'd prepared with all the relevant documents, zoning maps, city parking ordinances, even a printed email from the Department of Transportation. He flipped through them for a few minutes, eyebrows slowly rising. As he read, "Well," he said with a chuckle, "you've definitely done your homework." "I don't want to be a problem," I said, "but I also don't appreciate being pushed around." He nodded, handed the documents back, and said, "You're good. You're completely within your rights. Have a nice day." Greg was watching, from behind his curtains the entire time, no doubt waiting for the sweet sound of a citation. But none came. The officer tipped his hat to me, scratched Buster behind the ears, and drove off. Later that afternoon, Cheryl from the HOA came by. This time she didn't call. She showed up in person, clip-clopping up the sidewalk in those uncomfortable flats she always wore, holding a folder of her own. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her tone polite but strained, "we've had several residents express concerns." I raised an eyebrow. "About what exactly?" "Well, about the presence of your RV and the message it may be sending." "I'm not sure what message you mean," I said, feigning innocence. She took a deep breath. "Greg feels this is escalating." I smiled. Greg felt towing my property without just cause wasn't escalating. There was a pause. She didn't answer that. Instead, she glanced around, probably noting the cluster of neighbors gathered on a nearby porch watching our exchange like it was Saturday night entertainment. "Let me be clear," I said, dropping the act. "I followed every rule. I parked legally. I haven't disrupted anything. I'm not going to move it until my 72 hours are up." She tried a different approach. "We could look at amending the current rule. Perhaps allow a more flexible time frame for RV storage. Say a week per month, and we'd be willing to put that in writing if you agreed to move the vehicle early." That stopped me. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, they were realizing. They'd backed themselves into a corner. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You give me something in writing, something signed by the board that says I can park my RV in my driveway for up to 7 days a month, behind the fence, where it was, and I'll move it." "I'll have to talk to the others," she said. "You do that." She walked off, and I knew right then that I'd won. Not just because of the parking issue, but because I had exposed the cracks in their fortress, the absolute, laughable overreach that had gotten them into this mess in the first place. That evening, a couple from down the block walked by with their stroller and gave me a wave. The man stopped and leaned over the little white fence around the RV's awning. "Hey, just wanted to say, you're kind of a hero around here." I laughed. "A hero? For parking a vehicle? You don't know how many people Greg's come after. Wind chimes, flags, garden gnomes, even a little free library someone put in their yard. No kidding? He made us take down a hummingbird feeder once, said it was attracting pests." I shook my head. "That's... wow. So apparently, it wasn't just me. Greg's petty tyranny had been affecting everyone for years, but no one had dared to challenge him, until now." On the third evening, Greg himself finally emerged. Not his usual angry march, either. He approached slowly, wearing a stiff smile that looked like it had taken hours of practice in the mirror. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded and gestured toward the folding chair next to mine. He declined. "We're willing to make changes to the policy," he said, not wasting time. "Allow reasonable parking for active RV use, so long as it's behind a fence or screened." "That's what I was doing before all this," I said, He nodded, tight-lipped. Yes, perhaps we were too rigid. I didn't make it easy for him. I'll need that in writing. No fines, no threats, no towing. Of course. And I want a public acknowledgement, email, newsletter, whatever, that this was a misunderstanding. His jaw clenched. I saw the tiny twitch under his eye. Fine, he said. We shook hands. His palm was clammy. By noon the next day, Cheryl handed me the signed agreement. 7 days of RV parking per month, provided the vehicle was behind a visual barrier and maintained in working condition. That's all I ever wanted. I hitched the RV, drove it slowly back to my own driveway, and parked it exactly where it had been 3 weeks before, except now it was bulletproof. Buster jumped out and ran a few laps around the yard, tail wagging like he knew something had shifted. As I stood there, a breeze rustling the trees overhead, I felt something strange, a kind of peace. Not just because I'd won, but because I'd stood up for myself, and in doing so, stood up for everyone else who'd been pushed around. And even Greg, I think, learned something. Maybe. The funny thing? Later that week, I saw him at a local dealership. He was checking out an RV of his own. The weeks that followed felt different. There was a shift in the air, not just in how people looked at me, but in how the neighborhood itself carried on. Subtle at first. Less tension in the glances exchanged. At mailboxes, fewer cars speeding away the moment Greg walked outside, and more people smiling instead of just nodding tightly in passing. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid to breathe in their own front yards. It was funny how something as simple as an RV parked legally could create such a ripple. But it wasn't about the vehicle, and it never really was. It was about standing ground, exposing hypocrisy, and refusing to be quietly shoved into corners by people who thrived on control. The HOA newsletter that month was unusually diplomatic. In a half-page section titled, Clarifications on Residential Vehicle Guidelines, they outlined the new agreement in bland language, as if it had always been part of the rules. There was no apology, of course. Greg would rather eat his own lawn than put his name on anything admitting fault. But there it was, in black and white. 7 days of parking per month for RVs and driveways, provided they were in use, or actively. Being prepared for travel. Neighbors started stopping by more often, curious at first, then comfortable. One of them, Lisa from 2 houses down, brought over a plate of lemon bars and said, "I've lived here 12 years, and I don't think I've seen anyone stand up to the HOA like that." It was brilliant. I shrugged, but I couldn't help the grin that tugged at my face. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to be left alone. "Well, you got a lot more than that," she said with a laugh. "You gave the rest of us a little courage." By the end of that week, someone had put up a new hummingbird feeder. Someone else repainted their front door from approved beige to a daring teal. A couple added a second garden gnome to their front flower bed. I even saw a family put out a tire swing, and no one said a word. It was like the whole neighborhood had taken a collective breath and remembered what it was like to live like humans instead of walking HOA violations. Greg, meanwhile, mostly kept to himself. He didn't wave, but he didn't glare anymore either. He became neutral, occasionally visible through a window, standing stiff-backed behind the curtain like an off-duty guard. He didn't come to the next HOA meeting. Cheryl ran it alone, and she was strangely pleasant. No scolding, no thinly veiled threats. Just updates about garbage pickup schedules and tree maintenance. For my part, I started using the RV more. Not because I had to prove anything anymore, but because I wanted to. Buster and I took it out to the lake the next weekend. I fired up the tiny stove, made coffee with the windows open, and watched the sun spill over the water like melted gold. It was peaceful, freeing. I understood then why the fight had felt so important. Not just because of Greg, not just because of the rule, but because that sense of freedom was something worth protecting. When I came back, I parked the RV in the same spot in my driveway, same fence, Same visual barrier, and not a single complaint followed. One afternoon, about a month later, I saw Greg outside. He was standing in his yard, arms crossed, watching something across the street. I followed his gaze. There, parked in the public green strip in front of the neighbor's house, was a sleek, brand-new RV, bigger than mine, fancier. Still had the dealer's tags on it. Greg didn't yell, didn't pace, didn't call anyone. He just stared at it for a long time. Then, he walked across the street, stood beside it, and started asking questions. The new guy, a retired veteran named Carl, was happy to talk. I watched the two of them chat for nearly 20 minutes. When Greg finally walked back to his own yard, he didn't look angry. He looked curious. That night, as I sat in my backyard, grilling a couple of burgers, I heard something I never expected, a knock on the gate. I turned. There stood Greg. "Hey," he said, voice tight, like the word had to squeeze its way past a lifetime of pride. "Hey," I answered, cautious. "I just wanted to say," he cleared his throat. "You were right. About the RV, about the rules, about a lot of things." I waited. Let him take his time. I guess I got so caught up in order and rules that I forgot they're supposed to make life better, not worse. That was probably the closest thing I'd ever get to an apology. And honestly, it was enough. "Well," I said, "you're welcome to come by sometime. I've got a decent setup inside." He nodded slowly. "I might just take you up on that." He left without another word, but something had shifted again. This time, not in the neighborhood, but in him. Over the next few months, Greg didn't exactly become friendly, but he did soften. He stopped calling in complaints. He even stopped glaring at garden gnomes. Eventually, he put up a little metal trailer in his backyard. Nothing flashy. Just enough to suggest he'd dipped his toe into a new kind of freedom. Maybe he was trying to understand what all the fuss had been about. As for me, life rolled on. Peacefully. I still had my RV. I still had my driveway. But more importantly, I had my dignity. And so did everyone else on the block who had quietly been putting up with too much for too long. People started living again. Not chaotically, not recklessly, but freely. You could feel it at block parties, in shared laughter, in the way folks started waving to each other from porches they'd once avoided. The tension had cracked, and what came pouring out was relief. And I'll tell you something funny. The RV, it wasn't even the best part. The best part was knowing I didn't back down. That when someone tried to bully me into silence, I stood my ground, calmly and legally, and made them realize they couldn't scare people into compliance forever. One quiet Sunday morning, as I sipped my coffee and scratched Buster behind the ears, a car pulled up in front of Greg's house. A delivery guy stepped out and rolled, a set of RV leveling blocks toward the driveway. I chuckled. Greg was getting one of his own, and just like that, the circle was complete.